Uh, Awesome, awesome. I'll go ahead and get right started here. So, obviously, we saw a pretty big difference from week one Jefferson City football to week two Jefferson City football. What did you see from that team in terms of growth, and what differences did you see?
Let's talk about the consistencies first. Run game, we didn't turn the football over, and that's always a plus. Now we just need to get our run game a little more consistent. It improved from week 1 to 2, but we need to get a little more consistent. Played with great effort from start to finish. Not just our older guys, but our young guys on Monday fell behind early in the first half and played with great effort in the second half and got themselves back in the game. So I think what we're seeing is, we're going to line up and play. We're not going to, regardless of what the score is, we're going to line up and play it to the end, see what happens. I thought our tackling was better than it was in week one. Probably the number one area, Natalie, that has got me somewhat frustrated and I'm wanting to see great improvement in is our kickoff return, kickoff coverage, those things where if you look at our roster and see the type of athletes we have, you would think that covering kicks and kick returns and open space plays would be, they'd be something that would be, right in our wheelhouse, and it hasn't been. It's caused us to have, we're getting a lot of long fields through our kicking game, and everybody kind of asked me, why that's so important. I said, well, if you start a drive on the 20 instead of the 50, it's 30 yards. That's probably 8 to 10 plays for a 6 to 8 plays anyway. If you don't get a long play, it's 6 to 8 plays for a high school kid, and there's 11 high school kids out there, so that's 66 to 88 opportunities for a high school kid to screw something up. So if you start closer to the goal line, it just creates less plays to score and less opportunities to screw things up. And so for me, that's why that starting field position is so important.
What have you seen any growth from that special teams coverage, anything like that from over the summer to now, and if you haven't, what are you hoping to see in the next few weeks?
Well, what we're doing now is we're searching for players that want to make our special teams special. I mean, they want to make them great. And what happens is your best football players are playing offense and defense, and they're getting a ton of work in practice on offense and defense. And then you go, okay, now I got to put a kickoff team together. Who don't I want my best defensive players out there on kickoff? And so you put a kid out there to run down the field, and he's probably been on the field quite a bit playing offense or defense, and you might not be getting the greatest effort because they don't have as much gas in the tank. They've been out on the field all the time. So if you could find some guys, maybe some younger guys or some role players that would buy in and take that job, it's a double win for you. You got effort on your special teams and guys that take ownership in those special teams. And then you got your starters not having to be forced into that, and they're fresh when their series starts on offense or defense.
Do you feel like that's a special teams position? It's obviously a very important position to a football team. Do you feel like that's something maybe, especially high school kids, might look past? It's not the shiny, glitzy, offense, defense positions, but it's just
Natalie,
important.
every high school kid wants the ball in their hands. First thing you have to convince them is there's one football and one person's going to have it. So that means there's 10 other spots that somebody has to be doing something, and they're all important. What I try to tell everybody is a lot of those spots are invisible. How do you know what an offensive lineman's doing until the flag gets dropped and somebody mentions their name for a penalty? A lot of those times, those positions are kind of invisible. It's the guys that play the invisible positions and do it really well that make a football team. It's not the one guy with the ball in his hand. So that's that's just kind of a running theme among young people, I think, not just high school football players. Once you convince them that doing your job, regardless of whether somebody notices it, doing your job to serve the other 10 guys that are on the field, that might be having the ball in your hand. But when it's not, do your job. And so I think sometimes culture wise, culture being what you're willing to defend, sometimes that might be the hardest part of it to create and build, is that the success of my teammate is far more important than my own success. And if you can get kids to believe in that, now you've taken a huge step forward into building the program.
Mhm. Speaking of kids who do have the ball in their hands, David Bethune, when I was out there last week, he seemed to be having quite a game. How does he factor into that run game? You said that's a big hitting point for you coming to Jefferson City. How does he factor into that?
Well, the first person, my first day here on June 11th, when I came down the steps to the field, the first person on the field was David. He's the first player that I met when I got here. He was waiting for me when I came down the steps. And if you watch him in the weight room, he's one of the first into the weight room, and he's dropping more sweat on the floor than probably anybody. He's working as hard as anybody. You get him practice, it's the same way. Whatever you ask him to do, he's going to do. The part about David's game last week that went invisible, that a lot of people didn't recognize, was we were using him as a lead blocker for Seth on an inside quarterback run game. And when David has the ball in his hands, good things can happen. But the invisible part of his game was watching lead block at 140, 145 pounds on those linebackers for Seth. So Seth's run game opened up, inside run game opened up in week 2, and a lot of it was due to what David was doing, lead blocking for him. And he never one time said, "Coach, you do know I only weigh 140, 145 pounds, and you got me lead block." He went and just hit the kid. And so that's probably the invisible part of his game that nobody noticed.
We just spoke about the invisible players not always, appreciating those positions. So do you feel like David's definitely one that has stepped up and maybe appreciates the importance of being invisible on the field sometimes?
He'll do whatever you ask him to do, and he'll go 100 miles an hour doing it. If we're running a scout team, David will be out there running scout team offense against our defense and going at it. Whatever you ask him to do, he will do. And so those types of players, get enough of them, you can build something special.
You mentioned the defense. What do you think you need to see from them growth-wise for this week? Obviously, the last 2 games, they let up about 30 points each game. What do you think needs to change there?
Well, we had a younger secondary in the game week 2, and the speed of the game, I think, caught them off guard. And so they gave up some big plays in the first half. I think if you watched them play in the second half, you saw them get accustomed to what the speed of a game looks like. And as much as coaches talk about it, you're never going to simulate that in practice. It's not going to happen. So with that younger secondary, I mean, if you looked at all of our position groups, I could say young and inexperienced at dang near every one of them. And so having 2 games in, our younger secondary getting 1 game in, I'm hopeful that we don't give up the big play, that Rockbridge, if they're going to score, they got to work and drive to do it. And that, most of the time when we did give up a gash play, we had somebody pop a gap, we were just a little bit out of position. And when you got those running backs from Hannibal's big and as fast as they are, and you get yourself a little bit out of position, they're going to run through an arm tackle. So I would say gap sound and don't give up the big play, and then hopefully our offense can get our run game going and good things can happen.
In terms of Rockbridge, what are some things you've been telling your team they need to look out for, and how have you been prepping for them this week?
Well, I'm new here, so all of these teams and how they relate to Jeff City is something I'm having to learn. Historically, I always thought Hickman was the rival for Jeff City. Hickman was the Columbia school that was Jeff City's rival. I found out this week that there's a pretty big rivalry between Rockbridge and Jeff City between our players. And so I haven't really had to do or say too much to them. They know that Rockbridge is 2-0. They know they got some quality wins, especially over Staley, and that we're 0-2 and we're searching for some things and trying to get better each week. So I try to just focus on us and see what we need to do to improve our football team. But as far as talking to our kids about Rockbridge, they already know that this is kind of a rival game for them.
I was talking to Van Venetta earlier, and we mentioned, preparing for new coaches and things like that. Obviously, you being a new coach, how is it prepping for all these teams that maybe you may not know as much about them as you would before? And, Vanetta said, you're not prepping for the coach, you're prepping for the team, but still, how is that for you?
I'm leaning on our coaches quite a bit because they have a lot of experience here at Jeff City and with these schools and with these coaches and with a lot of the players, because I just don't know. And so I'm asking them a lot of stuff about everything, not just the team we're playing, but how we travel, locker rooms, buses, everything, because it's all new to me. It's not new to them. So I'm asking them where the potential hangups are and all that kind of stuff. So leaning on those coaches pretty heavily, Natalie.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate your time, Coach. Good luck.